Zoom recording. So we're now recording. So you're all very, very welcome to this inaugural Dublin Port Fest, brought to you today by the Ports Past and Present project team. And we're very excited. This is the first in a series of these events, which we will be holding in the 5 port communities in and with which Ports Past and Present is working, in Dublin, Rosslare, and then in Fishguard, Pembroke Dock, and Holyhead as well. And we'll be flagging those forthcoming port fests in those other places as we go during the day. Ports Past and Present is a project led by University College Cork in partnership with Aberystwyth University, the University of Wales Trinity St David, and Wexford County Council, examining and promoting the cultural heritage of the 5 ferry ports, the 5 active ferry ports in the Irish Sea Basin. The project is funded by the European Regional Development Fund through the Ireland Wales Cooperation Programme. I'm going to hand over to Aoife, who's going to do a little bit of housekeeping around things like photographing today's sessions and so on. Before I introduce our first session of the day, Ports Past and Present Presents, where we'll tell you a little bit more about our project. And then we'll take a short break, and then we will invite a number of heritage projects, heritage very broadly and diversely conceived in Dublin Port, who will tell us a little bit more about their project. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Aoife, and then I will introduce our first session of the day. So over to you, Aoife Dowling, my colleague Aoife Dowling, also at University College Cork.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, really excited for the day ahead. Just a note about publicity. So I'm going to be taking some screenshots to share on Twitter and other social media, and also to save for our project records for our funders to show, we held this event and who attended. If you don't want your image, your face to appear in those screenshots, again, like with the recording, just turn your camera off and that's no problem. If you are a presenter, so you have to appear, just drop me a note to say you prefer that I don't post it to social media. That will only be the project team for this particular session in any case. But same applies. If you don't want to be on social media, let me know. That's it.
Brilliant, thanks Aoife. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first session this morning. I'm already overrunning, so I'm going to be very brief here. And this first session of the morning, Ports Past and Present Presents, is an opportunity to get to know a little bit more about the Ports Past and Present project. I'm joined by a number of my colleagues from UCC, from the University of Wales Trinity St David, from Aberystwyth University, and from Wexford County Council, who are going to talk us through in more detail the Ports Past and Present project. Before that, a little bit more housekeeping. So I know, or if you're anything like me, you've spent the last year of your life living perpetually on Zoom. So this is probably not news to any of you. But for the sake of repetition, it's much better if you are muted while you're not speaking. That allows for a kind of non-interruption while people are speaking and presenting. I want to flag that we are joined today by Maya Thomas, who is a graphic harvester, who will be recording graphically some of the presentations and conversations we'll be having this morning. If you have a look, if you're on, I'm muted, apparently. Okay. Did anyone hear any of that? Yes, okay. I managed to mute myself somehow. So Maya is a graphic harvester. She's recording our conversations this morning. You'll find her graphic harvest is one of the screens in the grid as it appears on gallery view. You may like to pin that so that you can see her graphic emerge over the course of the morning. I'll be spotlighting it at various kind of junctures over the course of the morning, but it might be nice for you to pin it yourself as well, so that you can see her graphic emerge. And she's already, I think, started recording our conversations this morning. So thank you, and you're very welcome, Maya. There will be an opportunity for you to ask any questions of the project team at the end of this series of presentations. To do that, we'll be using both the chat function and the raise hand function in Zoom. To raise your hand to ask a question, you go to reactions at the bottom of your Zoom screen and just click on the raise hand function, and I'll see if you want to raise a question. We'll do that at the end of the presentations this morning. But like I say, I'm already overrunning. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Professor Claire Connolly, who's going to introduce the Ports Past and Present project before we hear from some other members of the project team about some of the project specific strands. So Claire's going to give us an overview of the project, and I'm very grateful to her for joining us this morning. So over to you, Claire.
Morning, morning everybody. Thanks for joining us. I am, like Jonathan, I am on the north side of Cork City and longing to get to Dublin again, not to mention such other faraway and exotic locations as Rosslare and Fishguard, Pembroke Dock and Holyhead. So we just have to hope. I don't need to tell I don't need to tell anyone here really about the ways in which the development of Dublin Port kind of gave shape to and lent an identity to the city itself. The development of Dublin Port, its walls, its buildings, laid down a kind of a lasting infrastructure. And those remarkable Georgian walls are not just testaments to incredible feats of 18th and 19th century engineering. They're also part of the identity of the city itself, and they've shaped the lives lived on the edges of the sea as well in Dublin. And that's where we're, I suppose, kind of imaginatively locating ourselves this morning to think about that. And port infrastructure and port architecture can be like that. It's sort of everywhere around, quite vast and looming, but also kind of easy to miss or forget about, or to let it kind of slip out of your consciousness, to not think about it or not raise it to the level of consciousness, kind of intimate and familiar, I suppose, in all kinds of curious and interesting ways. If you'll allow me a quotation from the novelist Elizabeth Bowen writing about Cork Harbour in her novel The House in Paris. She has a heroine sort of looking down over Cork Harbour, and she says she finds herself thinking that the harbour is good company. And I think that's a kind of a feeling that can resonate when we think about harbours. Later on in the same novel, the character goes to Kent, where she finds the canals are unfriendly in Kent compared to the companionship of the harbour. And it's that kind of intimate and familiar aspect of port heritage we want to think more about and to try and get at. I read something a while ago that described infrastructure, in general as things that get blown up in movies, which is not the ambition we have at all, obviously, for the session, but it's the thing about what brings these things to our consciousness. And of course, the same might be said of Irish sea crossings more generally, an intimate and familiar part of Irish life for centuries. And where we are now with both Brexit and the COVID-19 crisis have kind of suddenly and sharply brought to our consciousness aspects of these all too familiar and intimate histories. And that's not even to think about the Suez Canal and our newfound expertise in shipping routes that we're all sharing at the moment. So these things just go on silently and suddenly we notice them. So that's where we're kind of locating ourselves, I suppose, with Ports Past and Present, trying to think about, to bring the cultural heritage of the ports more to our consciousness, to think more about what kind of not only just the cultural heritage, but the kind of economic potential of that cultural heritage, what it might do for the future, how it might encourage people to kind of not just pass through ports, but to stop, look, think, spend maybe. All of that kind of work, and we're very lucky in that to be joined this morning by so many people who already have great expertise in the natural and cultural heritage of Dublin Port and who are willing to share their experience with us. So with that, I'll hand back to my colleague Jonathan. And thanks again for coming this morning.
Thank you very much, Claire. So what Claire has given, I think, is a sense of the rationale for our project, the importance of the ports in Ireland and Wales in the cultural, political, economic history, present and future of Ireland and Wales, and of the relationship between them. And that's very much what our project seeks to explore, to interrogate, and ultimately to leverage, to promote and develop tourism and tourism opportunities in and across these 5 port communities. And I'm joined by a number of colleagues from across the different strands of the project and across the different project partners this morning, who will give us a bit more detail on how exactly it is that we're going about doing that. And the first of those is Marianne Constantine, from the Centre for Advanced Welsh and Celtic Studies at the University of Wales, Trinity St David, who's going to talk us through some of the creative approaches that the project is taking to precisely this exploration of culture and heritage in and across the 5 port communities, and the creative ways that the project is seeking to do that. So over to you, Marianne.
Very much, Jonathan. Now, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. That in itself is a miracle.
Yes.
Greetings from West Wales. It's a real pleasure to be here, and how much more of a pleasure it would have been to actually be in Dublin this morning. But one day we'll get over the sea to see you. Now, I'm hoping very much that this little PowerPoint will work for you. But our particular strand of the project has the pleasure of working with 12 extremely talented commissioned artists who are going to be spending the next few months of this year and into next year looking at the 5 port towns, and they'll be sort of showing us, exploring the stories and the heritage and turning those into works of art, which will then in themselves become an exhibition. Now, I'm hoping very much that I've started at the beginning of this slide, and I might have to go back a little bit. Hang on. Am I sharing the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't seem to. Oh, hang on, it's gone.
Yeah. Hang on.
Oh, congratulations on winning the championship. Scotland did you a favour last night.
Didn't they just?
Hammered France, great.
So here we are. Here we are with our 5 port towns. And we have a little map here done by my colleague Martin Crampin of where our different artists are based, the 12 of them. And as you see, we have 2 floating in the Irish Sea, which is great because we can deploy them at will in various port towns. And I know that both Julie and John are going to be with you this afternoon for some of the workshops. So I'd just like to talk through our Dublin Port artists. We have Rua Barron and Hannah Power, who are going to be working on a theatrical soundscape journey around the port. And that will involve bringing community stories and memories into a kind of theatrical sound piece, which will be able to be played through one of our apps that James will tell you about shortly. And I think what Claire was saying about the infrastructure and the solidity of the walls, the ports, the ships coming in and out, what's very interesting is how many of our
Marianne,
artists...
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we can't see your presentation.
Oh.
It's disappeared.
Okay.
Apologies.
Right. Okay, thanks for...
We could see it at the start, but then it seemed
hang
to
on. Let me just go back.
vanish.
Yeah, I need to get out of flip into some kind of... If I go out to full screen. There we are. Now, can I go back?
We can see it now. Great.
Yeah, I'm on the wrong one though, unfortunately. Right, sorry. Is that working now?
We're good to go.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, so just to say that a lot of our artists are actually working with intangible heritage, with the voices and the memories and the conversations perhaps that go on in and around that infrastructure, and are going to be bringing the expression of the communities to life. And for Dublin Port, our chosen artists are a brand new exciting Power on the Scene, Rua Barron and Hannah Power, who are going to be looking at a soundscape for Dublin Port, and Augustine O'Donoghue, who's working in particular with wildlife and biodiversity conservation. And I gather has a thing about seagulls, and this is going to be brilliant because seagulls are something that connect us across the Irish Sea very effectively indeed. The Irish Sea artists, Julie Merriman and John Gower, will also, I think, be working with you this afternoon in some of the workshops. Julie's work is absolutely fascinating. She's a visual artist who explores modes of inscription and often uses old-fashioned and obsolete techniques such as the mimeograph to create, and she's going to be creating a series of port postcards for us. And John Gower is a well-known author and presenter in Wales, and his book, Cross Currents, is going to be exploring the Irish Sea area and bringing out the stories from the different ports and connecting them across the sea. Here's an example of the kind of work that Julie's been doing using the old mimeograph techniques, a beautiful kind of ghostly evocation of that infrastructure that Claire was talking about. And these will be sort of bespoke artworks, which will also become postcards that we can use in the project and connect people across the sea. But it's not just the Dublin artists who will be focused actually on Dublin ideas. Our Holyhead artist, Margaret Pendrell, has been working on a flotilla of little boats. And the very first boat in the sequence, she said, was inspired by the simplicity of the Iron Age Broighter boat, which she saw in the National Museum of Ireland years ago. And she's building up a collection through time of these little boats, each of which explores a different strand, a different period, a different century, and brings its own story with it. You can see what she's been up to on her blog on our website. Down in Fishguard, we have Peter Stevenson, who is focusing on collecting traditional tales and stories from around the Fishguard area. And this character, Shemi Wad, was way ahead of all of us in crossing the Irish Sea. He gets over to Dublin twice, once thanks to a flock of seagulls who carry him across, and once he's fired from a cannon and finds himself in Phoenix Park. And Peter's stories of Shemi Wad can be found on our website on his blog. And Peter's animating those, and we'll have lots of films and things alongside them. So, you know, as a way of cutting through the Brexit red tape, I think being fired by cannon across the Irish Sea is probably the way to go. Now, all of the artists in all of the 5 ports are quite keen to work across the sea with each other, but with other communities. So we'd be really pleased if you would talk to them and to us, to get in touch through the website and to help them weave those conversations and those intangible aspects of culture into the artworks that they create. And we're hoping then that by next year, we'll have a lovely book with images, stories, illustrations, but also an exhibition which may be real. We're hoping it's going to be real, but will also be online, where all those things can be collected together. And I'd just like to thank all my colleagues in, well, across both sides of the sea, really, for making this particular strand of the project such an exciting thing to work on. And we're really looking forward to seeing what comes out as the artists get more chance now, we hope, to move about, talk to people and create actually in the port town. So thank you very much, and sorry about the technical hitches there.
Not to worry, and we got there in the end. Thank you very much, Marianne, for introducing the work of the artists working in Dublin as well as across the Irish Sea. We're next joined by my colleague at Aberystwyth University, Rita Singer, who's going to talk us through the filmmaking aspect of the project and some of the ways in which we're hoping to use filmmaking, again, to promote the cultural heritage of each of our 5 port communities and the relationships between them. So over to you, Rita.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Can everybody see my screen? Brilliant. So my responsibility on the project is to develop a series of short documentary films with the help of a little film company who are based in Bristol and Broadhaven, and they're called Mother Goose Films. So the idea is that over the course of this year and up to early spring next year, we're going to produce 8 short documentary films of under 10 minutes running time. And we're also going to combine them into an overarching feature-length film, somewhere between 45 minutes and 1 hour in length. We're going to film in all our 5 port communities that are attached to the project, as well as the 3 ferry links between them. And at the heart of our films are going to be local faces and local stories. So it is very much that the content of these films is informed by whatever it is that the people who are participating, the local people who are participating in the making of these films are telling us. So it's not up to us to figure out what are the important stories. We're letting you tell the important stories instead. I already mentioned Mother Goose Films. They're a very small film company, but from the films and advertisements I've seen them produce, they are producing really, really great imagery and great pictures. Like I said, they're based in Bristol and Broadhaven, so that gives them a good hub here in Wales, from which they can set out and visit our communities in Fishguard and Pembroke Dock, and do a little bit of travel heading north to Holyhead. And they're hoping to make it this year over to Ireland once travel gets a bit easier again. Just to give you an impression of what we have been up to since the start of this year, since we signed up with Mother Goose. This is the Fishguard film we're currently developing. And like the name of our project says, we are interested in ports of the past, but we're also interested in ports of the present. So one strand, in order to promote the heritage of Fishguard, for example, we're going to tell the history and the heritage attached to the blue stones that went into building Stonehenge. We're going to explore the story of Barty the, or Black Bart, the pirate and inventor of the Jolly Roger. We're going to tell the story of the last invasion, but also the first flight across the Irish Sea. And we're going to do this with the help of local participants who are also showing us what they're getting up to in Fishguard in the present day. So there's going to be contemporary music. We're going to look at the current fishing scene, but we're also looking at how the local people explore their surroundings in a creative, crafting manner, and how swimming in the sea gives them restorative powers in a way. And we're hoping really that with exploring the heritage of our local communities, as well as their contemporary life, we're going to show that there is an exceptionally great sense of community in each one of these locations. So what's next? We are going to film across Wales until until early summer. Then there's going to be a little bit of a break, so that we can start cutting the first half of the films that we have produced up to that point. And then in early to mid-August, we're going to resume filming in Ireland. So we're going to finish up with Rosslare and the ferry links between Rosslare and the Welsh side with Pembroke Dock and Fishguard, before wrapping it all up in Dublin and the ferry link with Holyhead. So I'm actually using this as a potential casting call today, because we have looked at a couple of heritage stories attached to Dublin already, and we've become really interested in women's work that was undertaken in and around the ports, especially the camaraderie of the dockers has also raised our interest. We're quite struck by the story of the diving bell and the engineering ingenuity that went into it, but also the toughness that the workers in the diving bell had to bring to, well, working in this big contraption. We're also exploring stories of emigration and also the reuse of the Martello Towers as settings for contemporary or modern seaside exploration and fun on the beach. If you have any more stories, please come forward and participate in the production of these films, because we wouldn't have a film if it wasn't for local faces and local contributors to these films. So if you want to participate and if you want to share a story, please either email me, you can see my email here on the screen, or my colleague from the film team, Polly at mothergoosefilms.co.uk, and please share your stories with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita. So we've looked at creative explorations of cultural, natural and built heritage in Dublin Port, as we're pursuing those through the project, filmmaking as a way of doing that. I'm very distracted because on John's iPad I can see a very lovely dog sitting in the back seat and I'm very jealous. But sorry for that. Over to James Smith, my colleague at University College Cork, who's going to talk through the digital heritage aspects of the project, which have always been central to our project and its rationale, but have become all the more central in this new normal that we find ourselves in during the coronavirus pandemic. So James, over to you to talk through the digital heritage aspects of the project and how we're exploring and promoting the heritage of Dublin Port and our other port communities through a number of digital tools.
Hi everyone. So as Jonathan said, my name's James, and what I'm going to do in this is just run you through a whistle-stop tour, but I thought rather than telling, it would be easier to basically share some links with you so that in your own time you can have a look at our website and follow up on some of the material we've been doing for Dublin Port, and maybe imagine, as with Rita's talk, I too am very interested in stories and digital stories for the app that I'll talk about in a second in our website that you might have ideas for to contribute. So if you have a look at the website as it currently exists, you'll have some inspiration about how we might go ahead in the future. So basically, there's some links in the chat that I've dropped down of some of our tours. This is the link to our website that you can go to. Basically, it's the information about our project, but also a map where you can click through and browse around a series of stories. There's over 60 of them now, and we're continuing to expand. And also some information, news and current social media, that kind of thing. So you can use it to sort of find different aspects of the project. But I'm going to be talking about stories and tours just in the first instance. I've actually made a tour of some of our Dublin stories for you that you'll see in the chat, that you can find under that huge tours button on the top right of the website. And we've got quite a good collection of tours now, which are sort of sequential narratives of some of our stories. We can keep putting them together in different orders. So essentially, this is at the moment as it stands, we've got, this is sort of some of the stories in that tour I mentioned. So the one you can see up at the DCU campus up in Drumcondra is the site of where one of the balloon journeys across the Irish Sea set off. There's some to do with Ringsend and the Dockers community, the Dublin Time Ball, the diving bell, as was mentioned, and a series of other, the Welsh Chapel in Dublin, which is now an internet cafe, but was a sailors' chapel for Welsh seamen. There's a nice little growing collection of stories, and there'll be more as we go along, essentially. But just to reiterate, we'd love your ideas about stories, about especially about the communities around the port. So let us know any ideas you have, and we'd really love to make them a part of the collection, as well as the creative work and as well as some of the sort of academic work that project members have contributed. So this is kind of what I'm talking about when I say stories and tours. You know, they're sort of different items. We have featured stories that you can take a look at on the website. We share one every Friday, so on Facebook and on Twitter, so you can have a look and see what we're rolling out slowly when we create a new collection. There's sort of maritime tales, like grouped together, women's voices tales, family histories, that kind of thing. So, and they'll continue to grow and change and be added to as we go along. And this is the kind of body of working material that we have for the project. And the goal of it is to bring the past to life, to show the sort of depth of history, a growing depth of history for port communities in a sort of digital form. In the era of COVID, of course, when it, you know, immediate access to most of the sites for those living in other port communities and has not been possible, and travel has been, you know, severely curtailed. Having this sort of digital aspect to the project of being able to take a look into places that you can't visit, get a sense of what they're like, will then be kind of augmented as we go along by our app, which is based on an app framework called Safanama, which it was originally developed for urban history in India, and it means, I think it's in Farsi, the story of the journey. But we're making a version of it for our project called Port Places, that is an adapted version of the Safanama. And this is just a few sort of screenshots from my phone of the demo we've been working on for Fishguard, just to get it working, because it'll be ready sort of by May or so. The platform will be ready. Then we'll start talking to community members about putting together what are called experiences, which are clusters of stories in place. This app works with the geolocation on your phone. You can browse around and it will trigger off things that are near you as you walk around. But you can, and it has video, as Marianne was saying, with the creative work. It has sound. You can, you know, interact with the place in situ, but you can also, you know, look at other ports that you're not currently in and get a sense of the depth of their history and the connections of how they join together. So we'd love to hear any ideas you have for app content as well. Now that's basically me sort of done, but I'd encourage you to firstly take a look at that tour I mentioned of Dublin stories. Secondly, suggest things to us. We would absolutely love, as always, to hear more ideas, and I'm always here to facilitate collections or individual stories. And yeah, just take a look as the app comes out and things continue to grow. So thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. A very whistle-stop tour there of some of the multiple and overlapping ways in which Ports Past and Present seeks to represent and tell the story of Dublin Port and its environs, and the stories of the other port communities we work in and with on both sides of the Irish Sea, and of the connections between those communities as well, creatively through digital heritage and ultimately through filmmaking. It goes without saying that if you want any more information or if you'd like to talk to us about any aspect of the project, we would be more than happy to do so. And you can contact us through our social media, through Twitter, through Facebook, through Instagram, if that's your jam, if you're so inclined. As well as via the website, and all of that information is available on the website as well. So we've got around 10 minutes before we need to wrap this session up in order to take a short break and to get away from our screens for about 10 minutes before we come back for our roundtable on doing heritage in Dublin Port, where we'll hear from a number of other projects working in, with, around Dublin Port and the communities that live and work in and around the port on a number of aspects of heritage, natural, built, social heritage, very, very widely defined as we do on this project, define heritage very, very widely. But before then, I'm very happy to take any questions that you may have about anything you've heard about the Ports Past and Present project this morning. There's already been one, which I'm going to put to those that have presented, and particularly to James, but others from the project may also like to weigh in on this question. And it's a question that I had in the chat while the team were presenting, which is from Joe Ryan. And thank you, Joe, for your question. And the question was, should Dun Laoghaire not be included in Ports Past? It had at least 150 years of connection with Holyhead. And I know that this is a question that we've already got what I hope are some convincing answers to. And James, I hope that you might in particular speak to this question.
Well, I guess the easy answer to that is it is, but although our partner ports are the active ferry ports, our stories have spilled, like we have a collection, if you look on the website of Dun Laoghaire, Kingstown as was related stories, because one of the things that the project's kind of realizing or working with is the idea of, so ports don't stop at the port. Rosslare is Wexford, and the whole Wexford coast is historically a string of coastal communities. And the Europort has a certain role, but it's just one. And the same with Dublin, that we've got in Dublin we've got Dublin Port, but also the wider story of Dublin's coastal environs. We have stories from Howth and Portrane, that are relevant to the vicinity, but also say Dun Laoghaire. And we're taking a very coastal County Dublin coastal perspective to the project, as well as having that focus on the actual docklands of Dublin Port. So we would continue to see that as relevant to the story always.
Thank you very much. A reminder that if you do want to offer a comment or a question, and it's great to see that there's already quite a lively discussion going on in the chat, you're very welcome to do that. You're also very welcome to raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question in person, so to speak. It would be great to hear from anyone that would like to make a comment or ask a question this morning. We've got about 5 minutes left for this session before I kind of certainly need a top up on my coffee, and I'm sure that everybody else will too, ahead of our next session. So Karina Walsh, you've had your hand up, and I wondered if there was a question that you'd like to ask. If so, you're very welcome to unmute and to ask that question. Hi, Karina. We can't hear you, unfortunately, so I'm not sure.
Sorry about that. I'm after putting it in the chat. It's just that I have to leave for another Zoom at 11, and I'm really interested in all of this. So I'll come back in the afternoon, or can I? Yeah. So you're going to be doing you're going to be doing something after the break, yeah.
Precisely. Yeah. So to talk through the rest of the day, we have a session following this one with a number of community partners and projects based in and around Dublin Port, who will be presenting on their work in various aspects of Dublin Port's heritage. Again, natural, built, cultural, social heritage very widely defined, with some information about how you might get involved in that. And then this afternoon, we're really excited to welcome a number of our creative practitioners who will be leading sessions. Julie Merriman on vintage postcards and printmaking, John Gower leading a creative writing session, and Hannah and Rua, who will be leading a kind of theatre session. Many of you I know are already signed up for one or more of those sessions, and then we'll conclude with a showcase of some of the work produced during those creative sessions. So we're really looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to that. And it's been great to have this opportunity at this early stage in the day to, in some instances, reintroduce you to this project, in some instances, to introduce you for the first time to what it is that Ports Past and Present is doing, as well as to provide an update on some of the work that we've been able to do. I encourage you again to get in touch with our filmmakers, to get in touch with the project if you want to be put in touch with our creative partners working in Dublin and between Dublin and Wales. And if you have a story for our heritage, for our digital heritage aspect of the project, for our website or for our app, we'd also love to hear from you. So please do get in touch. And I'm going to hand over again to James very briefly before bringing this session to a conclusion, because he has a small announcement to make, and then I'll kind of bring us to the break, and we'll reconvene then for doing heritage in Dublin Port after that break. So James, I know you've it's earth-shattering and seminal announcement to make this morning. So.
Well, it's basically that we as a project have a series of cross-cutting themes, and we have to try and include the maximum amount of diversity of stories from the port communities. And one of the things we're starting to do now is call for particular genres of stories. And I take the word story very broadly. This could literally be like a little blog post style thing, but it could also be a photo essay or any kind of creative contribution you can think of. But basically we have, we're just about to next week advertise a women's voices call, which is one of our cross-cutting themes. So basically there's a little form here you can have a look at that sort of describes a bit what our stories look like and give you some ideas about how you could contribute something if that's something you're interested in. But I'd also once again encourage you, if you have an idea for a story, particularly on that theme, but on in fact any theme, to let us know, let me know, and we'll sort it out. We can work through it and figure out what the best format is. So, but that URL I've just put into the chat is for a particular form that you can fill out to submit a story if you're interested in that topic.
Thank you, James. And that brings us neatly, despite my attempt to force an overrun early doors in this session, to the conclusion of Ports Past and Present Presents, which I'm grateful I didn't have to say that many times. Before we go to the break, I'm just going to briefly spotlight the work that our graphic harvester, Maya, has been doing over the course of this discussion. Maya will be rejoining us after the break for Doing Heritage in Dublin Port, where she'll be recording all of the important information that comes out of that session in a way that you'll be able to refer back to should you hear about a project or something from one of our community partners who are presenting this morning that you may like to get involved in. You'll be able to refer back to the work that she's been doing. And it will also be appearing on UCC's, or images from the graphic harvest will be appearing on UCC's Instagram later this afternoon. So keep an eye out for that. And all it behoves me to do at this stage is to thank again my colleagues from the Ports Past and Present project for joining us this morning, for giving an overview of the different aspects of the project. And again, just to emphasize, if you have any questions or would like to make a contribution to the work of the project, then please do get in touch. So we'll reconvene here on the same link in 10 minutes time for Doing Heritage in Dublin Port. And thank you again for joining us for this first session this morning. And we'll see you in about 10 minutes. So thank you, everyone.